the McDonald McCartney line, which has been spelled out correctly, that the Chinese did not accept this. But the fact is that until 1893, without formal acceptance by the Chinese, um, this is what was being used. So I think a little clarification here to simplify this issue for the readers. I have a background in having read a lot about this. Um, I understood what he's trying to say, but maybe it might be better to simplify it a bit. Chinese sovereignty over Tibet dates, according to Professor Deepak, and correctly, from 1791. And he has cited a Chinese author on this, which I'm very glad he has done, because the popular Chinese discourse is that the dynasty brought Tibet into China. Here they don't use the word empire normally, but the fact of the matter is that both the Mongols, who are the Yuan dynasty, and the Manchus, who were the last rulers of China, the last imperial rulers of China, actually had a priest-patron relationship with Tibet, which is a significant factor which I don't think has been mentioned in this book, that it was a priest-patron relationship. I will not explain this at the moment. Uh, Now, this issue of settled populations and boundaries coming more into the present uh, as it crept into current uh, India-China relations. Now, a fact that which he has correctly brought out but not emphasized is that the only settled boundary that we have between China and us is the Sikkim boundary, and by a treaty of 1890. But the Tibetans themselves did not accept this, and there was some military issues and so on. And this is primarily because of the settled populations issue. We, and here I speak on behalf of India as such, uh, in India, seem to feel that the watershed principle is the only possible or correct principle, which is what the British used past tense, deliberate. But the Chinese bring up other things, and they have historical records to talk about Tibetan populations on this side of the uh, watershed who have been paying taxes to Lhasa, which whenever our negotiators go, they stumble on this as a stumbling block, and they don't know what answer to give. So I have answers, but it's not my. I'm not speaking on for myself now. So I think this could be explained a little bit more, or perhaps emphasized maybe. There are a few typos, unfortunately. One I pointed out, Johansson. There's another one called Mummers, and a few things like this needed to be studied. To more or less wind up, uh, there comes this niggling doubt at one point when Professor Deepak says that we did not accept, or the world did not accept, Chinese democratic reform in Kham. Now, Kham, one of the Tibetan regions, has been incorporated into various couple of Chinese provinces. But when you say democratic, it's an adjective which implies that you accept the term. Now, I don't know whether an academic work should actually accept the term unless it's a historical work written by the Communist Party or some such. Maybe it could be looked at. Now, there are issues of similar. Now, here's a small technical one, that Buddhist teachers traveled back and forth across the Himalayas. But as per history, they did not. They actually used to go into Afghanistan and travel all the way around Tibet before they got to China by going through into Sogdia, into the Tarim Basin, and then entering the Gansu corridor, and then entering Western China towards Gansu corridor, then Xi'an. So it's not that these Tibetan teachers, Indian Buddhist teachers, have been going back and forth actually across the Himalayas. Um, there are a few such other ones, but another one is this forward policy. It's mentioned in the book that the forward policy began in November 1961. But as a matter of fact, it was enunciated in 1951. So there's a 10-year difference over here, which I think needs to be looked at. Now, I have I think, run out of time, and I just have a couple of very small points, but I can ignore them because instead of the items mentioning, I've already mentioned. The rest are just examples, and but I'll just take two of the others. Now, the language used with regard to border negotiation, I think, needs to become a little more precise. An agreement, firstly, a border is like a contract in business. Both sides have to agree on it before it actually becomes a border. It cannot be unilaterally either by the British or the Indian government or the PRC made. And this is why they're not defining an LSE, because it ties them down. So now the first step is a treaty of agreement in which the border is delimited and after which it is demarcated on ground. So delimited and demarcated are not mutually interchangeable terms. I think this needs to become very clear. And lastly, a small niggling point. I do respect Professor and great knowledge and wide knowledge which he has given to us in this book. It's something I would really like to have as a reference book. That he says almost on page 174 says that almost 50% of Chinese GDP is accounted by its trade with Asia. This, I'm afraid, from an economics student's standpoint, is absolute nonsense because this could be said of GNP, but GNP is GDP plus minus your external trade. So therefore, this particular sentence definitely needs an amendment. I will leave it here. There are a few of these small things. I pointed out some of the significant ones. And if you're wondering, Professor Deepak, this is not a criticism of you. Writing and publishing is a very tedious and difficult business. I quite appreciate what you've done. It's a wonderful book to have. But some of these small things, because they're technically incorrect. I mean, this particular line, from the standpoint not only of Paul Samuelson, but any economic student in India. So some of these need to be rectified. And if there is a second print, you can get it done by the publisher. Thank you very much, all of you, for giving me this opportunity to speak. I'm sorry I've been a little harsh, but that's in the interest of making your second print run far more accurate, because it is a wonderful book which has brought us up from the past to right up to the present. And this is a reference book that every department, government, academia, the military perhaps a little more of what you gave us in the introduction, to say that I'm proposing that we do this, rather than just pointing them out, but which you have in today's presentation pointed out in your 7 to 10 minutes. So I know now, but I couldn't actually figure out from the book exactly how much of it you were proposing. There's not much proposed on the border, but never mind that. This book is not about the border. Thank you all very, very much. And if I have hurt or disappointed or gone beyond my time, which I have, I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Gautam Das. You should not be feeling sorry for being harsh or criticisms, because this is a critical evaluation of the book. So we all welcome, and you were true to the word in the beginning. You said that you will go into the nitty-gritty of the book, and you've done that in a very comprehensive manner. Thank you very much for that. And now we have the final speaker, Ambassador Bambawale. And not because we put him last, not because he's the diplomat who does the job the best by coming at the end, but also because he has been a very astute follower of China and India-China relations and a practitioner himself. So over to you, Ambassador Bambawale.
Thank you very much, Professor Adlakha. And let me say it's a great pleasure to be with all of you to discuss Professor Deepak's book. Let me start by congratulating Deepak. We all have agreed and we have all said how prolific he is as an author, as a writer. And therefore, I want to congratulate him on this relatively latest book, his newest book. I will not go into the nitty-gritty, Deepak, so please rest assured I will talk at a much holistic level. I will talk at a broad level. And I think I cannot but agree with you uh, uh, in what you have presented in your book, as well as what the comments you made here in this webinar today, that one of the big changes which is going to take it is the asymmetry in power, which has arisen between India and China. And give a, you have a lot more you have a lot more statistics, etc., and examples in your book. But let me just give one statistic that in 1980, the Chinese economy was of the size of 305 billion US dollars. India's was 189 billion US dollars. By 2019, the Chinese economy, as you rightly said, Deepak, was roughly $14 trillion dollars, and India's was roughly $2.9 trillion dollars. So there has become a huge asymmetry in economic, military, and comprehensive national power between the two countries. And actually, it is because of this huge asymmetry that the Chinese, in the summer of 2020, were able to undertake the military aggression that they did in our northern borders in Ladakh. It was one of the necessary conditions which was fulfilled and which then led to their to their military aggression and their attempted military coercion. Um, Let me also share with you some of the thinking which has been put forth from here in Pune, where I live and work, where we have a new paper and a soon to be published book, which is titled Strategic Patience and Flexible Policies: How India Can Rise to the China Challenge. So we start from where you are leaving off, Professor Deepak, in your book, and we are actually exploring and suggesting how India can rise to the China challenge uh, in the coming years and in the coming months, and in the short term as well as in the long term. In the short term, we argue that India holds a bad hand of cards because of this asymmetry that you have described in the book. And therefore, in the short term, we suggest that India should build balancing coalitions like we are doing with the Quad or even with other countries. Soon we are going to have a trilateral between India, Australia, and France. So India, there are roughly 20 countries that we have suggested, broadly grouped into three areas. One is the major democracies of the world. Second is countries which are on the periphery of China, like Russia, for example. And the third is India's neighborhood, like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And we suggest that India should build balancing coalitions with these countries. Balancing coalitions means that we go beyond just state to state relations, government to government agreements. There has to be a deep relationship between India and these countries. And perhaps India may also have to take certain domestic measures which will help in building those relationships. So that is a challenge for Indian diplomacy in the short run. In the short run, we have also argued that there is a desire in India for raising the costs, let me say, of Chinese aggression, and we believe that this should take the form of three areas in which we can work. One is that we allow Chinese government institutions to control sensitive assets in India, especially where they are where they are assets in strategic areas like ports or airports. Secondly, we argue that India should prevent Chinese espionage on Indian persons. And lastly, of course, we argue that um, uh, that that the area in which we should definitely avoid Chinese leadership is in Chinese technological standards. We should work with global standards rather than Chinese technological standards. So these are our short-run suggestions. In the longer run, we need to do exactly what you have argued in the book, Professor Deepak. We have to focus more domestically inward. in ensuring that India's GDP, that India's economy, India's productivity, India's industrial production increases. And we have suggested that there are three areas in which India, not only as the government, but also the people have to focus on. One is that there is increasing amount of government activity in economics through public sector, etc. And we must attack that. We must reduce that because eventually it is private initiative which is going to grow the economy. It is private investment which is going to grow the economy. The second area we need to tackle is, of course, the growing administrative state, which means that there are more and more actions on the economic side which are taken administratively by bureaucrats, even by ministers, which interfere in economic decision making, which will need to be so we need to reduce that state. And finally, of course, is the question of rule of law. Any company, you can't treat company A and B differently. You have to give platforms so that they can make the economic decisions which are required in industry, which are required in business, free of having to think about what the government is going to do and what role the government is going to play. So in the long term, we believe that this will revive investment in India, it will revive growth in India, and it will revive India's GDP growth and make it rise to 7 to 8% per annum. And if we are able to do that over an extended period of 20 years or more, then we project that by 2047, when India is 100, independent India is 100 years old, when independent India is 100, the discrepancy between the economies of the two countries will have reduced. India's economy in PPP terms will be 64 trillion dollars, and China's will be 84 trillion dollars. So the discrepancy of about 5:1 today will be reduced by 20%. So these are some on which I wanted to share with you. This is we take off from everything that you have written in your book, Professor Deepak, and we go into the future as Professor Singh was already talking about. The report is already out and it's available. It's a 22-page report available on the website of Pune International Center. A book is in progress. It is to be published in 3 to 4 months from now. And the title, of course, will be the same: Strategic Patience and Flexible Policies, How India Can Rise to the China Challenge. Professor Adlakha, I'm going to stop there and leave that as food for thought for all your guests and for our very distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for pointing out and bringing into discussion the book, the paper, joint paper, and the book which you said will be out in a couple of months about India, how is India going to rise to the challenge of China. I have read some of the previews of the report and I'm looking forward to it. And now going back to the discussion, I think it's fair enough. It is 3 versus 1. So Deepak should be given some time to respond to some of the points which have been pointed out by our panel of experts. Maybe Deepak, you can take 3 to 5 minutes to respond to some of the points which have been made, and then we can open it to the question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you. I thank all the panelists, for their inputs and suggestions. I thank you all. And as far as some of the nitty-gritties pointed out by Colonel Gautam, I appreciate so that you pointed it out. So some anomalies are bound to be there, and I think typos and maybe some other, irrespective of great efforts from Springer and maybe myself, but somehow so they are still there. So I think if they bring out the second one, some of the anomalies, they would be taken care of. But as far as the border issue is concerned, so I think I didn't discuss it in great detail because that has been discussed in my previous book, India and China, 1904 to 2004, A Century of Peace and Conflict. And Colonel Gautam, if you had time to go through that, I think that is in more detail, right from the genesis, and I take great pain in going through. I hope you have also gone through most of the material related to border, whether they are in the form of white paper or the voluminous official report, and memoirs of various people, including army people, those who have participated in the war, including those voluminous volumes by Arthur Lamb and so on and so forth. Not only that, but also the Chinese side, what they have brought out in their official history of the 1962 border. So I thought that was not necessary to make mention about, because I was not particularly discussing border. But I think I did make mention of this 1890 Calcutta Convention somewhere in passing when I was talking about Doklam. But here again, I think that is, of course, from my personal perspective as an academician. I was trying to say that if we are interpreting the convention of 1890, the way we try to interpret it as far as which is the southernmost point, and so on and so forth. So I was trying to make an argument that would be dangerous, because it would alter the position which British India and China took at the time of 1890. Of course, you are right that they never accepted that border alignment. Even back then, they eradicated the border pillars, so those were put in place. As far as various these the boundaries which have come into being. So I think it was just in passing that I have just mentioned out, whether it's the Johnson Ardagh of 1865 or McCartney of 1899. I think it wasn't here to discuss, to the nitty-gritty of the lines. So, and then I think the focus was why we have come thus far, and how China is approaching. In fact, I was hinting that if we are trying to adopt sort of like maximalist position vis-a-vis our border, especially in Western sector, so that is again going to be a huge problem. And I think the same tactics the Chinese side, so they have adopted. I would say it is also sort of like maximalist position, unless and until we go what I have quoted Ambassador Cheng Ruisheng, who was ambassador in India in the early 90s. In fact, he has tried to explain what Chinese side meant by Zhou Enlai's 1960 this package deal, which he elaborates quite in length in his article. Of course, it's in Chinese, and I've quoted and translated one of the paragraphs which I have incorporated in this book, that China will accept 90,000 square kilometers of territory, which they call Southern Tibet, as part of India, and then India would have to cede 33,000 kilometer of territory in western sector. Well, I think all points I have taken them in good spirits, and I appreciate that you have mentioned them. And I also appreciate Swaran for his comments. In fact, I was thinking that you would also be adapting a little critical approach towards some of maybe the flaws I may have in the book. So I hope next time, if I or you are invited again, you please also give some of the critical input. And as far as Ambassador Bambawale's comments are concerned, I appreciate. In fact, I have also gone through some of the reports and reviews which appeared in the newspaper about the forthcoming book, and I'm looking forward for it to go through it and maybe incorporate your findings in my next project. One I have not contemplated as yet, so I want to take some break, and I have some other translations to be completed. And once I am done with that, maybe I'll contemplate other things. Hamad, this much for now.
Okay. Thank you, Deepak. Now, before we open the question and answer session, may I also use my prerogative as the chair and maybe make a comment or observation? If anybody wants to comment on that, please welcome. I would like to first thing point out is that from the title of the book and also a quick run through in the book which I've gone through, and also on the basis of the discussion today, especially also what Ambassador Bambawale pointed out certain things about India and China. I have this feeling that there is a very clear undertone of Cold War framework in our mindset when we are looking at India and China. So that I don't know how good or wise that is, especially in the 21st century now. And I'm also saying it in the context of some recent geostrategic and geopolitical developments in which India is very actively a part of it, whether it is Quad or whether it is Indo-Pacific, etc. And you have mentioned in the chapter 8 in the book, which is titled India, China and the Indo-Pacific Cooperation and Competition Amidst Soaring Maritime Ambitions. I think you have spent, perhaps because of limitation of space and time, 3 pages on Indo-Pacific in the chapter. And the one thing which I wanted to point out is that you also have mentioned in the chapter that the idea of the Indo-Pacific strategy and Quad, which has been seen by China as a containment policy, is gradually getting lodged into India's military and foreign policy calculations. So I just wanted to raise it as a point of caution that it seems, as you have also pointed out, that in India, the mainstream scholarship and also the official view seems to be that we have taken it for granted that now this is where our foreign policy is heading towards. So that I think needs more discussions and more caution perhaps. And why I am saying so is because experts have pointed out in America also, in Japan also, and in Australia also, that suppose, for example, in the eventuality of a military conflict or confrontation situation developing in South China Sea or vis-a-vis Taiwan, where America will be directly involved, Japan and Australia, of course, without hesitation would plunge in. But there is a big question mark on India. One, because of India's own geopolitical, geostrategic interest, and secondly, also because of India's close relationship with Russia. So these are also some of the dimensions which people have pointed out. So I think we need to perhaps discuss more whenever we have time, and because that is going to be the future now, that how this equation is going to unfold. Now, with these comments, I would open the floor for question and answer session. And I would request the audience, please Ask your question, be brief, introduce yourself, and just shoot your question. No need to type in and send in. And I may also point out that anyone who has a specific question addressed to Ambassador Bambawale, please do that first, because he has to go for some other engagement. So he might have to leave earlier than others. So any questions? Because I don't see anybody's hand raised so far. If not, then maybe Deepak or other experts perhaps can throw some light on the Indo-Pacific aspect, maybe Professor Swaran Singh or something.
Okay, let me say, first of all, I think I am in agreement with what my very dear friend Colonel Gautam Das brought out. But as an academic, he himself is an author. He's been doing enormous amount of research himself. I did underline, the fact that this speed was very visible in the way the book was produced. And it is usual, Gautam, if I can address you with first name basis, that publishers, when they deal with senior authors, very often in West, for example, senior authors only provide what is called jumbled manuscript. Senior authors don't even provide a clearly written manuscript. It is for the publisher. And publisher takes a lot of responsibility in sorting out, and it gives to people who are, sort of people with the literature background who improve upon the English language, look at the details, proofreaders, research staff. Since I was a bit familiar and I was looking from that perspective, I did underline the fact that this was enormously speed production, because in 2020 the book has almost every issue that needs to be commented upon in the bilateral relationship. Since we don't have a representative of publisher here sitting with us, I avoided that, several, not just the errors that you brought out, but even more simpler typographical errors. I'm sure since you looked at the book so seriously, you came across also several typos. So in that sense, I was looking at Deepak as author of an idea here. And I think the central idea, therefore, was to look at the whole spectrum of issues that are, at such super speed, transforming and engaging these two major Asian nations. And that spectrum, I think, to me, was the central message in the book. Regarding Hemant's mentioning of Indo-Pacific, that is one area where, in that sense, the bilateral tussle might potentially be moving into, where the regional geopolitics or geopolitical frame is being kind of recalibrated. And given the fact of 2020, on which book is primarily focused, India has seen a certain drift in sort of being little away from what is called strategic autonomy, or sort of equilibrium, or equidistance. Those are kind of buzzwords of Indian earlier non-aligned foreign policy, which are kind of getting new interpretations now, and could see India and China not just engaging each other at the border. And that is why you see I partly made mention of Zorawar Daulat Singh's recent book on power shift. He's looking at how India itself is expanding the bilateral equations to ensure that deterrence for pressures on the LAC, or as the book says, LCA. On LAC, responses could come from the maritime, could come from what India does by sending ships to South China Sea. So Indo-Pacific is being incorporated by India itself into the bilateral equations, both positive and negative. India wants to invite China into Indo-Pacific discourses. We have China include this Indo-Pacific in the Indo-Maritime dialogue. But India is also expanding the deterrence component of the bilateral equations to the Indo-Pacific region, not just by raising its engagement in Indo-Pacific in terms of vertical engagement, going up to the senior leaders now, summit meeting level, but also widespreading it by talking about Quad Plus, Quad Plus Plus, even themes. It's now called framework. And therefore, there's a whole lot of thematic expansion, vertical expansion, horizontal expansion in which India is engaged. Is showcasing that Hemant is right in saying that Indo-Pacific could become an extension of China-India bilateral equations. Is a neutral word, but tussle or tensions could also be partly a better explanation of how relationship is evolving. But I understood, since the book was it's like a contemporaneous commentary on a whole range of issues, that speed obviously was greater focus than either the depth of an argument, which I said is already there in his earlier works, or even accuracy of certain sort of details, like you mentioned, of some names or some type of errors. So with that understanding of how a senior author ultimately ends up producing jumbled manuscripts in super speed kind of works driven by a single idea, I thought those are things that publishers should have taken care in that sense. And I didn't want to bring them out because we don't have a publisher's representative sitting here. But thank you, because Gautam did brought out a lot of issues, and I believe there will be a second edition, very likely, because Deepak's books get really well appreciated in the market. They get sold out. So hopefully there will be a second edition, and we will see that inputs that Gautam has provided will also be brought into it. But I assume Deepak will also bring that and give that feedback to the publishers as to where their responsibility lies in producing a good manuscript which is marketable. And senior author is only supposed to give you a big idea, and a sort of jumbled manuscript is how great books are written around the world. Thank you, Hemant, for giving me a second chance to speak. But it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see that a very large number of your students and other people are participating in this discussion today. And that, again, I wish to compliment you as chair to be able to organize such a vibrant discussion today.
Thank you.
Hemant.
Thank you. Ambassador Bombawale, if you're there, would you like to comment on Indo-Pacific or any other topic for 2 minutes? Ambassador, are you there?
James is left, I think.
Okay, Colonel Gautam Das, would you take your 2 minutes now for the second round?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Hemant, and thank you, Professor Swaran Singh. I do appreciate what you've said, but I think I had mentioned that I'm actually critiquing the book and not Professor Deepak. Right. For whom I'm full of admiration. Now, on the Indo-Pacific, there is a military viewpoint or an angle which I would like to spell out before we start looking at it as a done thing, or the Quad as a done thing. Because for one, China looks at it also not just from the international or diplomatic relations or diplomatic angle, they also look at it from military angles, as is well known to us. But in our case, sometimes these things don't run as a whole, which we are all aware of, and there is this silo mentality in our entire society, and which continues into government, is well known. So the last part of what I want to say on Indo-Pacific is, for us, in reality at the moment, our capability is on the Indian Ocean region. It's not really Indo-Pacific, even though the Americans have included this in the Indian Ocean region within the Indo-Pacific. A small aside, I was involved with the first discussions as a relatively junior officer, but then I was asked to also brief Lieutenant General Claude M. Kickleiter, Deputy Commander-in-Chief Pacific, which the Pacific Command in Hawaii, has been renamed now as Indo-Pacific Command, and the head is always an admiral, and the number two is a general. So General Claude Kicklighter, Lieutenant General Claude M. Kicklighter, was the first person to bring this strategic cooperation with India as a proposal from the USW to us. And this is before Gulf War I. I was asked to brief him on desert warfare, but that's not what I'm talking about. What he mentioned then has since become a little popular. And that is, he said, our command has responsibility from Hollywood to Bollywood. His words. Now, but in reality, the Pacific Command only hugs our western coast because the Arabian Sea, most of it comes under the US Central Command, so which looks after the Middle East and so on. Now, here we have an issue with, with this because our physical capability only extends up to Malacca. We don't even have bomber aircraft, so that whoever's thinking of these foreign policy issues, it is not translated into the military realm. And even the Navy is a little confused because they don't get clear directives. This issue of sea control or a sea denial is also very much part of this. And how far? If you have bomber beyond Malacca, which we don't have now, but we should have, then we can talk of Indo-Pacific. I'll leave it there because this is a subject by itself.
Okay. Thank you so much. Deepak, your final word, just maybe less than 2 minutes, because we are running out of time now.
Yeah, I think overall, I try to put each and every issue what I have dealt in the book in perspective. Of course, from my own perspective, by way of analyzing, Chinese sources and other secondary sources which are available in the open source. So it is that perspective. So as far as Indo-Pacific, I agree, because I have argued that it appears that India has taken this into an account of our military as well as diplomacy. And I also try to argue that the Chinese, how they view it, whether it is Indo-Pacific as such and Quad, which they believe it is important part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. But Chinese themselves, so they are, taking it seriously now. So they believe that it is not the way Wang Yi earlier described that it is going to dissipate like sea fog. So I think they have given it a seriousness that it seems that the Chinese actions, I don't know whether they accept it or not, but I think for me it is the reaction of the Chinese actions, all over the places. So that was the point of argument, and I was not suggesting to anyone that it should be part and parcel of military or diplomacy. Not like that. I was just analyzing the materials, and for me it appears that it has been taken into account our military and metrics of diplomacy. So I think I appreciate the viewpoints and comments from all the panelists and the intervention from you as well. And maybe in future, so if in fact Indo-Pacific is such a huge topic that entire book or volumes could be brought out, Indian perspective, Australian, Japanese, Americans, and Chinese, various perspectives could be. So maybe Swaran is planning to have one international webinar on Indo-Pacific. So maybe he will bring out a volume out of it, and then maybe it will complement a whole lot of arguments and perspective which we have.
Very quickly, I think we have a question in the chat box from Mr. L.V. Krishnan on what role does people-to-people program have been between the two countries? How has it gone so far, and what needs to be done? If anybody would like to, Deepak, would you like to reply to this question?
Yeah, I think people-to-people is an excellent idea, and people-to-people interaction between the countries, they should not not be impaired by a whole lot of maybe military conflict and other. But then, unfortunately, so they are hijacked by the military conflict and other. And then, as we have seen that that people-to-people contacts between India and China, so they totally came to a complete halt. In fact, last year would have been the 70th year of India-China diplomatic establishment of diplomatic relations, but it was totally washed out initially by COVID-19 and then by the Galwan conflict. But I think they will resume very soon, as I have seen an advertisement from Ministry of Human Resource and Development, and they have opened up these scholarship programs for the Chinese students, those who would wish to study in India. So it appears that slowly, maybe people-to-people relations, so they would be on track. And then the one who had asked this question, in order to know more about people-to-people relations, and one of my translations, which have just come out in English, and Hindi is also coming out, and I have titled is China and India, Dialogue of Civilizations. This has been brought out by Pentagon. So please go through it. You will, get a wonderful insight into various facets of people-to-people dialogue between India and China. And the book focuses primarily on literary dialogue between India and China throughout 2 millennia. So it's a wonderful book written by one of my friends, from Shenzhen University, Professor Yulong Yu. So please have a look. I think it is already available on Amazon, and recently Sunday Guardian, they also published one book review, about it. So I'll stop it here. Amant, I think you have frozen.
Yes, I think host is frozen because we are discussing Himalayan relationship.
Yeah.
Is there any other student volunteer who would step in? He was being supported by a set of students. So maybe Gargi, who was introducing, if she's here, she could step in and. Deepak, are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you. It seems that the hosts, so they are, disconnected.
So I will take your leave then. I think he was already saying yours was the last comment. So in that sense, I think.
I think.
Yeah. So I'll take your leave and mention to Hemant later.
Sure. Thank you, sir. So I'll see you
Pleasure.
maybe on 10th. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Sir, we are facing some technical problems, so it will take time.
Is it? But I think more or less it is done, because we have already taken 1.5 hours. It's already 12:34. So maybe if.
Well, the chair has to announce the meeting closed.
Yeah, but the chair, I think, is not online. So the
hosts and the chair have left. Then we can leave on our own.
I don't know.
I think we can leave on our own in that case.
It appears like this.
Right then, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you on this panel. Goodbye then.
Yeah, thank you, Colonel. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Professor Deepak, I'm L.V. Krishnan here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I asked that question from the angle of increasing awareness about China in the Indian people. Okay. Now, I think for this we must have better language ability among Indians, and I find that totally lacking. I think the government.
Yeah, that's why in in one of the I think maybe chapters, so I have recommended that China and Indian studies, they need to be promoted in each other's countries. Unfortunately, here in India, so we are not promoting the way they should be promoting. They should have been promoted. And capacities, need to be expanded and built. The problem is that, in this country, if we need to write our dissertation in Chinese, there are no experts in country to review it.
Exactly.
That shows like how much work we have to do in this country as far as capacity building in Chinese studies is concerned. And same thing applies to China. But China, I think they are doing a better job because of the better you can say economic strength. They are doing it across the states, in different states. Now almost 20 plus universities and institutions. So they have programs in Hindi, they have programs in Tamil, they have programs in even Punjabi. And in one of the universities at the center of Beijing, so they are planning to open up 100 Indian, 100 almost languages of the world, and most of them they would be from India. In fact, they have already incorporated Hindi, Tamil, Punjabi, and Urdu is there. So Bengali is also there. So for 5 of Indian languages, they are already being taught. And then Chinese, of course, so they have money, so they are sponsoring various projects in order to promote these languages and their own work. It is a two-way sort of like traffic. For example, the works written by Chinese authors, good works, they are being translated into different Indian languages and Chinese. So they are sponsoring these projects. But of course, in the wake of this COVID and Galvan, all these projects, so they have been halted. And as far as Hindi is concerned, I think so they have put a check, but not a check on the regional languages of India. The works in a regional language, so they are still been executed. And secondly, there should be a link between the publishing industries, academia of both the countries, which I think has not happened. Though there is an attempt from the Chinese side to connect to the Indian publishing industry and academia to some extent, something has not happened from the Indian side. Side. There are various other things which we can we keep on talking about people-to-people connections, but I think this will happen if the push is from the both sides. If it is just from one side, I don't think it will materialize that much.
Actually, I think the Chinese have a more difficult job because they have to deal with so many languages from India, whereas we have to learn only Mandarin. That's a much simpler thing. And
Right.
I think we should be able to arrange for Mandarin teaching courses in all parts of the country, if not necessarily from the People's Republic of China, but perhaps from Malaysia, Singapore, where there is also Mandarin talent available. Invite those people to come and teach here. That doesn't really become very expensive. Only the attitude, only the intention must be there, right?
Yes, I mean, if you want to, know China,
Yes.
whether it is, for your good or, I mean, knowing the other side, it is always for your own good, right? If you want to know, you want to know and understand China, then of course you need to put efforts. So whether these efforts are put by the state or the private enterprises, so that has to be there, But somehow I think in India, so it has not happened. I always keep on saying that, so China being our neighbor, and irrespective of our relationship being good or bad, we have to deal with each other. So therefore, we need to, build capacities. And you are right that, if not from mainland China, if you are facing problem with China, then why not other Mandarin-speaking regions, including Taiwan?
Yeah.
And but then, it should also be maybe reflected in government policy somewhere at some level. Otherwise, it doesn't work out. Ultimately, it also requires resources. And, universities in India, institutions in India, so they don't have resources. Resources are being cut. And the first thing they will see that, okay, these Chinese-speaking people, anyhow, they are not, required, and we should just cut funding to these guys. So I think that there are some, problems and issues.
Yeah, I think the government must be impressed upon the need for this. I don't know how many voices the government hears, perhaps a lone voice from a person like you, but there must be many more people speaking to the government about the need for this, urgent need for this.
No, I think there are people, for example, Ambassador Bambawale himself. So he is, a votary for strong people-to-people relations and building capacities in Chinese language. He himself is a Mandarin speaker. He speaks good Chinese. He is a master there, and he understands China. I think people like him, so there are people. And but the problem is that maybe so the central government, so they have their own priorities, and such capacity building initiatives at university level or maybe in smaller institutions, so they are not given priority. So I think if and that is one of the things which I also argued in my initial remarks, that if we want to understand China and the problems where we are heading, we need to have a strong China policy. And in order to back up that strong China policy, we need to have a strong base of Mandarin, knowing people in this country. And not necessary that every Mandarin speaking is a China expert, but I think it will ultimately benefit government to formulate our China policy, and so maybe take some cue out of it, where we should be should be focusing, and what are the things we need to take care of when we are dealing with China at various levels, not only at policy level, but then maybe trade, investment, and identify areas where we could deal with each other constructively, rather than being apprehensive of each other. So I think that has to be that, rather than having the slogan of boycott China, altogether. I think that will not work, or decoupling from China, as people have been talking about. So that will not work, and it's not also.
I wholly agree. Now, since we have a few minutes, if you have a few minutes, I would like to ask another question. I've been reading about your thoughts on how the Buddhist scriptures were translated from Prakrit or Sanskrit into Chinese. Now, the two languages are so different, right? Now, how did they manage, and how did the early Indians learn Chinese, and how did they actually interact with the Chinese scholars who were keen to have the Buddhist scriptures translated? How did they go about it? It has been
mostly they translated from Sanskrit. Most of the Buddhist scriptures, which are available now in China, so they have been translated from Sanskrit. Of course, the initial translation, it wasn't from Sanskrit. It was from various Antillasian polities languages, like Sogdian, Tokharian. So
Right.
these were some of the languages initially, which were known to people, and then in fact also these were the areas where Buddhism made its inroads,
Right.
earlier than
Right.
China. So that's one of the reasons. And as far as Sanskrit, translation is concerned, most of them they were people from say that time because five Indies, Tianto, five Indies or five Indias, geographical divisions of India, as the Chinese they mark them. Many of them they were from the Kashmir and central India also, Magda state, like people like Kumaraji, so who translated almost 412 fascicles. So his father was from Kashmir, and then he knew Sanskrit. And as far as Chinese is concerned, they learned Chinese, when they reached China. Kumarajiva, when he was made captive in Lanzhou, so he studied Chinese there, and in a couple of months, so he mastered the language. And another thing is that they were not the sole translators. I mean, he could be the chief translator, but he was aided by hundreds of local Chinese. He was pronouncing, he used to hold the manuscript in his hand and then rendered into Chinese, and the teams, who assisted him, they were the people who jotted it down for him. So that is one thing. And from the Chinese side, they did learn Sanskrit in India. For example, Xuanzang, right? So he stayed in Nalanda for a certain number of years and then picked up Sanskrit there. And when he traveled back to China, so he studied, he translated, he engaged in sutra translations. He also, did a lot of translations, and in fact, one of the most prolific translators. They translated over maybe 1,000 fascicles in China, and so was the case with others like I Ching and Fashian, who also did Vinaya text in. And then there were many others, Indians, like Paramartha was one, so who picked up Chinese when they were there in China. No one, so they studied in India, but then once they reached there, so they studied Chinese there, and they were aided by people, not, them. They were not on their own. So they were. It was institutionalization of translation industry in China by the monarchy. I think that facilitated the translation of so many sutras. Otherwise, it would have been a difficulty. Yeah, I think the hosts are back now. But
thank you so much for taking so much of time and explaining things to me. Thank you.
Yeah, most welcome.
It seems like that there is a Okay, Anupam. Yeah, you continue, please.
Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We look forward to hosting the webinar on a monthly basis. As we were facing some technical issues during the webinar, I hope that you will excuse the technical glitches and inconvenience during the meeting. Thank you all the speakers, Hemant sir, Deepak sir, Gautam Bambawale sir, Savan sir, Colonel Gautam sir. It was very enlightening to hear you, and I'm sure all our listeners were benefited. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, thank you. So we can log out, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you for taking all the trouble and organizing and be the back office of this seminar. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.
Bye-bye.